Budget reasons. That's what Vivian from finance said to my face after I handed her a 23-page performance analysis documenting every cost-saving initiative I'd implemented, every process I'd streamlined, and every vendor contract I'd renegotiated that saved the company roughly $340,000 over 18 months, while she was busy color-coding spreadsheets that nobody read and scheduling synergy workshops that somehow cost more than my annual salary budget. Reasons. She repeated like a broken printer stuck on the same error message while sipping her oat milk macchiato that probably cost more than my lunch allowance for the week. I didn't flinch. Didn't argue. Didn't even let my eye twitch when she did that patronizing little smile, the one that says I'm about to explain basic math to someone who clearly doesn't understand how businesses work. Except here's the thing about budget reasons. They're only valid when the person saying them actually understands the budget. And Vivian? Well, Vivian thought depreciation was something that happened to her car value, not a fundamental accounting principle that I'd been leveraging to restructure our asset management for 2 years straight. She sat there in her ergonomic chair that cost more than my monthly parking fee, explaining fiscal responsibility while wearing a watch that could have funded my raise for 6 months. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast and serve it at one of their overpriced executive retreats. But let me rewind to the moment this financial apocalypse began brewing 3 weeks before Vivian decided my raise wasn't in the cards. I was hunched over my laptop at 11:47 p.m., manually reconciling purchase orders that should have been automated 6 months ago if anyone had bothered to listen when I suggested upgrading our procurement software. Instead, they spent twice my requested budget on a team-building retreat where everyone learned to make artisanal soap and complained about work-life balance, while I stayed behind fixing the inventory discrepancies that were bleeding money like a severed artery. The retreat cost $47,000 for 2 days of trust, falls and personality assessments that determined what we already knew. Jennifer from marketing was a people person, and Todd from IT preferred working alone. Groundbreaking insights that definitely justified the expense. Meanwhile, I was in the server room at midnight with a flashlight trying to trace cables that hadn't been documented since the last millennium because proper IT infrastructure mapping wasn't in the budget. But soap-making workshops apparently were essential for organizational synergy. The irony was thick enough to cut with a budget knife. I'd saved them enough money to fund 3 raises like mine, but somehow there wasn't room in the budget for basic recognition of competence. Meanwhile, they had budget for consultants who charged $400 an hour to tell them things I'd been saying in emails for free for months. Consultants who wore expensive suits and used buzzwords like operational synergies and strategic realignment while I was in the basement, literally crawling under server racks to trace network cables that hadn't been documented since the Clinton administration because, heaven forbid, we budget for proper IT infrastructure mapping. I remember the exact moment I realized how deep this budget hypocrisy ran. It was a Tuesday morning staff meeting where Vivian proudly announced they'd hired Sterling Consulting Group for $85,000 to conduct a comprehensive efficiency audit. I raised my hand politely and mentioned that I'd already completed a similar analysis 3 months earlier, identifying $200,000 in potential savings. But my report was buried in email chains while Sterling's PowerPoint presentation with identical recommendations got a standing ovation from executives who apparently needed external validation for internal expertise. Right around here, if you're nodding your head thinking been there, done that, bought the discount therapy, then smash that subscribe button. I'm grinding toward my first 10,000 subscribers, and every click helps me fund more metaphorical budget battles against financial incompetence. Because if there's one thing corporate America loves more than wasting money, it's paying premium prices to have someone else tell them they're wasting money. Back to my tale of spreadsheet warfare and numerical justice. So I walked out of Vivian's carpeted crypt with my face straight, but my brain already shifting into what I like to call forensic accounting mode. I didn't rage quit, didn't storm off to LinkedIn to post passive-aggressive career updates about toxic workplaces and budget mismanagement. I just went home, made a cup of tea that actually cost less than her daily coffee habit, and opened my personal laptop for some after-hours detective work. Because here's the beautiful thing about being the person who actually does the work. You know where all the bodies are buried, financially speaking. I'd spent 2 years cleaning up messes, tracking down phantom expenses, and optimizing costs while everyone else was focused on looking busy in meetings. That could have been emails that should have been deleted, emails that somehow generated follow-up meetings to discuss the meetings about the emails that nobody read. My first stop was the monthly budget reports that Vivian treated like classified documents, but were actually available to anyone with basic system access, which apparently didn't include most of the people making budget decisions. I pulled up 18 months of data and started building what I called my reality spreadsheet: actual costs versus projected budgets, actual savings versus reported metrics, actual vendor performance versus the rosy pictures painted in quarterly reviews that always seem to coincidentally align with executive bonus periods. What I found was a masterclass in creative accounting, not the illegal kind, just the kind where incompetence masquerades as complexity and waste gets reclassified as investment. Our office supply budget had somehow increased 34%. Despite moving to remote work, which raised interesting questions about what exactly people were ordering for their home offices. Apparently, printer cartridges and sticky notes were critical for Zoom meetings. Our software licensing costs were hemorrhaging money on applications nobody used, including a $15,000 annual subscription to project management software that nobody could figure out how to log into because the IT department was too busy managing the 17 different communication platforms we apparently needed to replace email, and our consulting fees had tripled while internal productivity metrics remained flat, suggesting we were paying premium prices to achieve the exact same results we were getting for free from internal expertise. But here's where it got interesting. Buried in the miscellaneous expenses category, like financial Easter eggs waiting to be discovered, was a line item that made my blood pressure spike $15,000 for leadership development seminars, attended by Vivian and 3 other executives who clearly hadn't learned much about leadership, unless being condescending to competent employees was now considered a core skill taught at overpriced retreats in wine country. $15,000. That's more than my requested raise. That's more than most people make in 3 months. That's enough money to fund actual improvements. Instead of teaching middle managers how to say no with empathy while wearing name tags that said, "I'm an active listener," but wait, it gets better. I kept digging because once you start pulling threads in a budget built on incompetence, the whole fabric starts unraveling like a cheap suit in a boardroom full of shareholders. $8,500 for team building retreats that nobody remembered attending, except for the group photos posted on LinkedIn with captions about synergy and collaborative excellence. $12,000 for motivational speakers who apparently motivated everyone except the people doing actual work, one of whom charged $5,000 to spend 90 minutes explaining why we should think outside the box, while standing inside a conference room that probably cost more than my car, $22,000 for software subscriptions to platforms that were supposed to streamline communication, but somehow required 3 different apps to schedule a simple meeting, plus a 4th app to remind people about the other 3 apps. and my personal favorite $18,000 for diversity and inclusion consulting that resulted in exactly one mandatory training session where someone explained why calling your female employee sweetheart wasn't professional development, while the presenter somehow managed to mispronounce half the names on the roster. Meanwhile, I was manually updating inventory systems with spreadsheets that looked like they were designed by someone having a breakdown in Excel because there wasn't budget for automation software that would have cost less than half of what they spent on speakers who told them automation was the future. The math was insulting. I generated $340,000 in verified, measurable, documented savings. They'd spent $75,000 on consultants, trainers, and feel-good initiatives that produced zero measurable results, unless you count the motivational posters that now decorated the break room with phrases like, "Success is a journey, not a destination," and "There's no I in team." But somehow my $12,000 raise request was fiscally irresponsible budget constraints, they called it, while approving expense reports for executive lunches that cost more than my weekly groceries. I started building a spreadsheet that compared my cost savings to their wasteful spending. It was like comparing a surgical scalpel to a chainsaw made of burning money. Every dollar I saved seemed to get immediately redirected to some consultant who promised to teach them how to save money. The circular logic was so perfect it belonged in a museum dedicated to administrative incompetence. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, though. Watching someone waste money while claiming poverty does tend to activate certain primal frustrations, but because I was planning something beautiful. Something that would make Vivian's budget reasons explode like a piñata full of fiscal responsibility stuffed with every receipt and invoice that proved their hypocrisy. The job boards became my evening entertainment. But not for the usual reasons. I wasn't looking to escape. I was researching ammunition. Every posting for budget. Analysts, financial coordinators, procurement specialists, anyone who might appreciate the kind of cost optimization I had been doing for free while executives paid consultants to recommend the exact same improvements. I started building a portfolio not just of my achievements, but of my market value. What someone with my track record could command in an organization that actually understood return on investment instead of treating competence like a budget line item they could cut when convenient. 2 days into this financial reconnaissance mission, I got an email that stopped me cold. Subject line: vendor audit consultation opportunity. The sender was someone I'd never met directly, Rebecca Thorne, Senior Procurement Director at Hartwell Industries, one of our biggest clients, the kind of client whose contracts kept our lights on and our executives in expensive suits. Apparently, my name had surfaced during their internal review of vendor relationships, specifically in connection with some cost optimization recommendations that had been implemented through our partnership. She'd heard through the grapevine that I was the one actually driving the improvements on our end. Not the executives taking credit in quarterly presentations, not the managers who forwarded my reports with their names attached. Me, the person Vivian claimed wasn't worth a budget line item. Her email was professional, polite, and loaded with implications. "We've been tracking performance metrics across our vendor relationships," she wrote, "and your optimization initiatives have resulted in measurable improvements to our mutual cost structures. Would you be interested in discussing how we might expand this collaboration through a more direct professional relationship translation? They wanted to hire me away from the people who didn't value me. We scheduled a call for Friday. I burned a personal day. Told Vivian I had a dentist appointment. She barely looked up from her monitor. Probably assumed I was taking time off to emotionally process my budget-related disappointment. I smiled sweetly and let her assume whatever she needed to assume. Meanwhile, I was preparing for what might be the most expensive phone call of her career. I walked into Hartwell's downtown office wearing the same blazer I'd worn to my last performance review. The one where I'd presented detailed metrics that Vivian had somehow transformed into budget constraints. Their lobby had actual marble floors and coffee that didn't taste like it was filtered through crushed dreams and bureaucratic despair. They sat me down in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, natural light, and the kind of furniture that suggested they invested in their workspace instead of spending their facilities budget on motivational speakers. Rebecca leaned forward. No corporate theater, no small talk, no trust exercises, just business. We've been watching the improvements in service, quality, and cost efficiency from your company, she said, and every time we trace the source, it leads back to your work. Specifically, your vendor optimization and process streamlining your recommendations have saved us approximately $180,000 annually through improved logistics and reduced redundancy. I sipped their genuinely good coffee and tried not to look too eager while internally calculating how much money I'd made for everyone except myself. She continued, "We're expanding our internal procurement team, looking for someone who can replicate that kind of systematic improvement across our entire vendor ecosystem. Someone who understands both the technical and financial sides of optimization. Someone who can turn cost centers into profit drivers, instead of hoping consultants will eventually stumble onto solutions that internal experts identified." Months earlier, the conversation lasted 90 minutes, during which they outlined their entire organizational structure, their growth plans, their commitment to promoting from within, and their philosophy of paying market rates for demonstrated expertise. By the end, they'd outlined a position that was essentially everything I was already doing, except with actual authority, resources, and a salary that made my requested raise look like pocket change. They wanted me to start after their Q4 budget finalization, which gave me exactly enough time to orchestrate something beautiful with my current employer. Something that would turn budget reasons into budget reckonings and transform Vivian's fiscal responsibility lecture into a masterclass in why competent employees leave when incompetent managers control the purse strings. I walked back to my apartment with takeout. I actually wanted to eat for once and spent the evening crafting what I like to call my financial disclosure package. Everything I discovered about budget inefficiencies, cost overruns, missed opportunities, and the creative accounting that made them all possible. Organized, presented, and documented like a forensic accountant's fever dream meets investigative journalism. I wasn't building a resignation letter. I was building a case study in why competent employees leave and incompetent managers stay, a comprehensive analysis of how budget reasons become budget excuses when the people controlling finances don't understand the difference between cost and investment. But the beautiful part was still coming, the coup de grace that would turn Vivian's budget reasons into budget nightmares, and make her realize that sometimes the person you're trying to budget out is the same person who's been making your budget work the next morning. I did something unprecedented, something that would either get me promoted or fired, but definitely wouldn't leave me in the same position. I requested a meeting with Vivian's boss, the CFO himself, Douglas Kane, a man who'd once complimented my quarterly cost analysis, but had somehow never translated that appreciation into actual compensation adjustments. A man who signed off on consultant fees, but claimed budget constraints prevented employee recognition. I sent the meeting request at 8:03 a.m. with a subject line that guaranteed attention and probably caused some coffee spills: budget optimization proposal with immediate ROI potential, competitive retention considerations, and documented cost-benefit analysis attached by 8:47 a.m. I had a reply. Wednesday, 2 p.m. conference room. Bring comprehensive documentation and supporting materials. Douglas wasn't like Vivian. He actually understood numbers, which made this whole exercise significantly more interesting and significantly more dangerous for everyone who'd been playing fast and loose with fiscal responsibility. He knew the difference between revenue and profit, understood opportunity cost, and could read financial statements without needing a consultant to explain what the numbers meant. I spent Tuesday night preparing not just slides, but a complete financial narrative showing exactly how much money I'd saved, how much more I could save, how much my departure would cost them in terms of lost optimization and institutional knowledge, and most importantly, how much they were spending on external consultants to duplicate work. I was already doing. I cross-referenced every savings initiative with the consultant fees, paid for identical recommendations that were never implemented, every process improvement with the retreat costs that supposedly built teamwork but never translated to productivity, every vendor renegotiation with the software subscriptions nobody used. The pattern was clear. They were paying premium prices for external advice while ignoring internal expertise, then dismissing internal expertise as non-budgetable. Wednesday arrived like a financial reckoning dressed in business casual. I walked into conference room C with a leather portfolio that weighed more than Vivian's daily coffee order and contained enough documentation to make a forensic accountant weep with joy. Douglas was already seated reviewing something on his tablet. No pleasantries, no warm-up, no corporate small talk about weather or weekend plans, just the kind of direct approach that suggested he actually had work to do and respected people who did the same. "Let's see what you've got," he said. Like a man who'd been waiting for someone to finally bring him actual data instead of another PowerPoint. About synergistic collaboration, I opened with the numbers clean, precise. Undeniable 18 months of documented cost. Savings, $340,000. In vendor renegotiations, $85,000. In process optimizations, $127,000. In software licensing, restructures, all tracked, all verified, all completely absent from any performance review or compensation discussion, all generating returns that funded consultant fees for people who recommended the exact same improvements. Douglas leaned back slowly, his expression shifting from polite interest to something resembling concern, mixed with the kind of focused attention that suggested someone was about to get very uncomfortable. "This is comprehensive," he said, scanning through page after page of documented savings. "Why hasn't this been reflected in your advancement trajectory? Why haven't these results translated to recognition?" I paused long enough to let that question hang in the air like smoke from a controlled burn. Because Vivian told me there wasn't budget for my raise while simultaneously approving a $15,000 leadership seminar that taught executives how to say no more effectively to employee compensation requests. I slid a printout across the table. Budget allocation analysis fiscal year. Comparison actual costs versus approved expenditures, consultant fees versus internal savings, external recommendations versus implemented solutions. His eyes moved across the numbers, then moved again more slowly, then a third time with the kind of focus that suggested someone was about to get very uncomfortable with their budget allocation decisions. "Apparently there's budget for consulting fees that exceed my annual salary, but not for recognizing the person who actually generated the savings that funded those fees." I continued flipping through my documentation. Here's the vendor optimization that saved $47,000 annually. Here's the consultant report recommending the same optimization for $12,000. Here's the leadership retreat that cost $8,500 to teach communication skills. Here's the email thread where my process improvement suggestions were ignored for 6 months before being implemented by an external facilitator for $15,000. Here's the software subscription audit that identified $89,000 in unnecessary licensing fees. Here's the consultant report that identified the same subscriptions for $25,000. Douglas set down the paper, his jaw working like he was chewing glass. This is... He paused, looked at the numbers again. This is a significant oversight. That's corporate speak for someone's about to get fired, and it's not going to be me. I nodded politely. I prefer to think of it as a learning opportunity for budget allocation practices. But I've received an offer from Hartwell Industries that suggests the market has a clearer understanding of value-based compensation. I slid the offer letter across the table face down, not to be dramatic, but to give him the option of looking or not looking at what his competition valued. My work at the silence that followed was thick enough to balance a budget on Douglas, looked at me, then at the papers, then back at me with the expression of someone who just realized he'd been stepping over dollar bills to pick up pennies. "You're considering leaving," he said, like a man who just watched his best investment walk toward the door. "I'm considering market rate compensation," I replied. "Whether that happens here or elsewhere depends entirely on whether this organization wants to retain the person who generated these results or continue funding seminars about leadership empathy, while the person who actually saves money gets told budget reasons prevent recognition." He picked up the offer letter, read it twice, then set it down with the careful precision of someone handling explosives. "This is substantially more than your current compensation," he said. "It's also substantially less than what I've saved this organization," I replied. "Plus, they're offering equity participation, performance bonuses, and a budget allocation for process improvement initiatives that I'd actually control instead of watching them get outsourced to consultants who charge triple my salary to repeat my recommendations." What happened next was beautiful in its fiscal simplicity. Douglas picked up his phone, dialed Vivian's extension, and said 5 words that I'll remember until my portfolio is fully vested. "My office 10 minutes now." He hung up, looked at me and said, "Stay right here." I have some budget reallocation to discuss while I watched through the glass walls. Vivian walked toward the CFO's office carrying her usual coffee and her usual expression of mild administrative superiority, the kind of confidence that comes from never having your budget decisions questioned by someone who actually understands finance. She disappeared through his door for exactly 14 minutes. I know because I counted, and during those 14 minutes I could see animated gestures through the frosted glass, the kind of body language that suggests someone is learning about budget accountability. In real time, discovering that budget reasons only work when the person hearing them doesn't have better numbers. When she emerged, her face had gone through several interesting color changes, and her coffee cup was notably empty. She walked past conference room C without looking in, didn't make eye contact, didn't wave. Just walked straight to her desk, sat down and stared at her monitor like it contained the secrets of fiscal responsibility or possibly her updated resume. Douglas returned carrying a folder that looked significantly more substantial than the performance review materials I was used to seeing. The kind of folder that suggests someone just got very serious about retention and compensation. He sat down, opened it, and slid a document across the table. Revised compensation package. Effective immediately base salary increase. Performance. Bonus structure. Equity. Participation. And what I believe you'll find is a more accurate reflection of your contribution to organizational fiscal health. I looked at the numbers. They weren't just fair. They were aggressive, market competitive, plus a performance bonus structure that rewarded the kind of optimization work I'd been doing all along. plus equity participation, that meant my success directly translated to personal financial growth, plus budget authority to implement improvements without having to watch them get outsourced to expensive consultants. Additionally, he continued, we'll be restructuring the budget oversight responsibilities. Vivian will be focusing on compliance and reporting, while budget optimization and vendor relations will report directly to this office. You'll have a team of 3 analysts and discretionary authority over process improvement investments, up to $50,000. Quarterly translation. Vivian would be tracking numbers while I'd be controlling them with a budget bigger than most people's salaries. But wait. There's more, because apparently Douglas had been paying attention to more than just my cost. Savings. He opened a second folder. We're also implementing a suggestion review process, he said. Any cost-saving proposal from internal staff gets fast-tracked evaluation before external consultation. Every process improvement gets attributed to the originating employee, and we're establishing an innovation bonus pool funded by documented savings. The message was clear. No more. Watching my ideas get stolen by consultants. No more budget reasons. Blocking recognition. No more paying premium prices for external expertise, while internal competence went unrewarded 3 months later. I was sitting in the same conference room where Vivian had delivered her budget reason speech. Except this time, I was presenting the Q4 cost optimization report to the executive team, including Vivian, who now reported to me in all matters related to fiscal efficiency. My team had generated another $200,000 in savings, which funded not just my compensation adjustment, but an entire department restructure that elevated 3 other undervalued employees who actually understood the difference between cost and value. We'd eliminated 6 redundant software subscriptions, saving $34,000 annually, renegotiated 3 major vendor contracts, saving $67,000 annually implemented, automated reporting that eliminated the need for 2 consultant contracts, saving $89,000 annually. And most satisfying of all, we'd canceled the annual leadership retreat and redirected that $47,000 to employee development programs that actually improved skills. Instead of teaching trust falls, Vivian sat in the back row taking notes on decisions she used to make with the kind of careful attention people pay when their own performance review depends on understanding concepts. They'd previously ignored. Her new role involved tracking the savings my team generated and reporting them to Douglas, who used them to justify expanded budget allocations for further optimization initiatives. It was poetic justice, served with spreadsheet precision. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, she approached me with the sort of careful politeness reserved for former peers who now control your budget evaluation. I heard congratulations are in order, she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who finally understands how budget allocations actually work, and why competent employees leave when budget reasons become excuses for not recognizing value. I smiled the same polite smile she'd given me 18 months earlier when explaining why competence wasn't budget compatible. Thank you, I replied. It's amazing what becomes possible when budget reasons align with actual budget realities, and when the people controlling budgets understand the difference between cost centers and profit drivers. She nodded once, then walked away, probably to update her LinkedIn profile with more accurate descriptions of her financial oversight responsibilities. Because here's the thing about budgets. They're not mysterious. They're not subjective. They're not weapons for maintaining status quo, incompetence. They're tools, and like any tool, they work better in the hands of people who actually know how to use them. People who understand that saving money requires investment. in the people who know how to save it. Vivian learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it the profitable way. And somewhere in a conference room right now, someone else is being told there's no budget for their raise by someone who just approved budget for leadership seminars about effective communication. Meanwhile, my portfolio keeps growing. My team keeps optimizing, and my budget reasons have become other people's budget realities. Thanks for watching, you financial warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my former budget manager, then you're probably busy taking notes on fiscal responsibility.